this you could find in genetics. So this is a genetic term for the, well, yeah, biology. Well, there's three domains they like that exist. Life exists within three domains, they say. So what I'm about to tell you is not like my original idea or something. It's certainly an idea I agree with, and I thought it was. When I read about it, I read it, I loved it. I mean, it was all true, and I thought, like, well, of course it's true. See, when I read something, I could feel feelings about like how true it's, what it's missing. I may not know, but I usually get a feeling for, or I'm told directly something too. So uh, these days now, I have a better communication with my God, with my higher power. So he could just tell me stuff, but that it's not been that long since I could talk to him actually, and I could actually talk to God. So understand that he actually talks to me, but I don't imagine what he's saying. So the three domains of power are a way to understand your relationship with God, or if you, or how you could have your relationship with God, or your wife, or your kids, or your friends. Basically, the three domains of power are the domains which all of us exist in and use for when we interact with each other. And we're all a hierarchy, so that the human race is very much of a hierarchy. Like the military, there's a rank. Somebody's either higher ranked than you or lower ranked than you. And humans, by their nature, are creatures of a hierarchy, where they, whether they like it or not, especially if they don't like it. So the kind of crazy part here is, or the it's kind of, it's like the ironic. It's like the more you don't like the idea of something, sometimes you can get pulled into it. Which means that, like, if I don't want to be a certain way, maybe that's which I can't escape it. So if I don't like to be a certain way, maybe that's the way I'm forced to be, or I feel forced into it. So when you realize that the human race is a hierarchy, and that even the humans that don't want to be doing bad things, they don't have a choice. If the hierarchy exists, then and if the hierarchy is bad, then we're all pressed into it, and we may not escape. We may not escape it, and I can't tell you that it's because we can't literally escape, and it may be that we can't literally escape. But I'm going to tell you, it might be that we're not allowed to. And so ultimately, the means to how we escape, if we could, it may be that, if God lets you escape, well, it's more like letting you out. If someone lets you out of prison, well, then you could say you escaped when you got out, but you wouldn't be telling the truth. And certainly, if you were released from prison, then you wouldn't want to tell people that, yeah, you actually escaped, because like they'd feel like, what, because they'd feel what really happened. They'd know on some level, did you really escape from prison, or did they let you out? Well, you wouldn't want to tell them that you escaped if you were released, because then what you'd do is provide to them a misinformation that would lead them in the wrong direction. See, I wouldn't even leave prison. If they released me, I wouldn't even leave prison. I would say, I don't have to leave. You can release me, but I don't have to leave. And if they told me, well, how long you been here? And I said, my whole life, man. I've been in prison for 50 years. And they said, we want you to go and leave today. You're free to leave, my friend. I'd say, I'm free to stay. That's how I'm free. I'm free to stay here in my prison, and I ain't leaving. So don't think you can make me leave. And understand what they'd do then. They would kick you out of prison. They would kick you out of prison, and you could not stay in prison. You could not decide that you're going to be the one to do it. They would kick you out. So the domains of power exist as in the first domain. The first domain is a domain that is a domain of power, and it's a spiritual domain. And the domain it's described as an area of effect. Like, for instance, when a firecracker explodes, the sound it makes goes all through the area. So you can hear a firecracker go off. You can hear it for 100 yards, right? So a domain would be the sound, the area that you could hear a firecracker when they light a firecracker and it blows off. Well, the firecracker's domain is how far the sound travels before you couldn't hear the firecracker anymore. So that's a pretty big domain. You could hear a firecracker for a half mile. And so that domain, that firecracker says, I got a half a mile of domain, man. If you can hear my explosion when I go off, well, then you're in my domain. If you can't hear it, if you can't hear the firecracker when I lit it, I'll say, well, you weren't in my domain. You must have just been outside of it. And it's probably 100 yards at least in every direction. So there's a large domain for a little firecracker. And when you increase it to an M80 or a stick of dynamite, a stick of dynamite has a way more powerful domain. Stick of dynamite you could hear for a mile away pretty easily. So one stick of dynamite could say, man, my domain is 1 mile in all directions around me, man. So I got a huge domain of power, or a domain of influence, or whatever my pride is about how great I am. I'm like the bigger the domain or the area of effect, the more pride, self-importance you have, which means that the domain itself, domain one, it is existing in the whole universe, meaning the size of the domain is in the whole universe. There's nowhere that domain really does not exist, except that's not really true, because domain is a moving entity. So domain moves into and out of areas. So there's lots of areas the domain's not in, but it's always in any area at any time. So it's considered to be in every area all the time. It's really not ever gone, and because it shows up that quickly, and it'll always be there. The first domain exists alone, and when the first domain was created, there was not a second domain. So because that, and now understand, it's important to understand that the first domain, it came into existence, and it's described as Adam was created by God. So when the first domain was created, think of it like God created Adam in his image, and God's domain is not the first domain. So the three domains are truly, they're all domains that God could use, but I want you to think of the first domain as an image or a domain that could be considered kind of like the ultimate domain, which is God's domain. But first domain is it's Adam's. Adam was created, God created Adam in his image, and so that God created kind of a domain that was kind of like his own and gave it to Adam. Adam's domain is a spiritual domain. It's an influence, an emotional influence, an effect, which is because Adam's alive and living, is there. So as long as Adam's alive and breathing and thinking and feeling, and especially feelings are the cause and effect of all domain, and especially the first. Meaning the feelings you have will be certainly being affecting the domain to make it more powerful or more influential. So what you're doing in the first domain, if you're using the first domain of power as your own, well, it's likely that you don't have any other domains. So it's often common the first domain acts alone, a solo fighter pilot. So like a jet fighter pilot is almost certainly in the first domain. And when there's wars, soldiers are always in the first domain. So if you want to think of what's it like, it's like when you see a war and you see men in battle fighting each other, you could pretty much tell that that whole battlefield is all the first domain. There's nothing else in it. There's no second or third domain, not really. And there might be, but it's only where people are injured and yelling for help. So a man got his leg blown off and he's going, he's in his like second or third domain, because if he remains in the first, he's not going to be losing it. The first domain will never lose itself. And if it's in itself, it is a domain, which means that panic, fear, and things like running away, if you're scared of the battle, that's because you're not in the first domain. So understand that a soldier would need to be taught in my army. Well, this isn't something they're going to teach you in psychology. Probably not. I don't think they even know this, but ultimately I'm sure they must. I'm sure that in their own way, they know exactly what I'm saying. Because the domain described is the way they do it. I agree with it, but I'm describing it much differently, although the same way. I'm trying to give you an understanding on a level that goes way farther than any psychology book. So the first domain is a spiritual influence potential, that you can have as a power. And why you have the first domain, and it's by itself, it's called a singularity. Now the word singularity is very important because the first domain is considered what's called a singularity. A singularity, it means it's a single-mindedness, or it's selfishness, or its singleness is alone. The entity is by itself and not in company with anything else. So it's called a singularity. It's not a plurality, not with more than one. So that I want you to think of two people hanging out like friends and they're together. So if two friends are hanging out together, well, that doesn't mean that they're really together or even near each other, because positioning of the bodies of people has nothing to do with the domain they're using, or the power of their domain, or the influence of the domain, or even the skill of how to use a domain does suggests that the second and third domains are much weaker than the first, but exclusively can be stronger than the first under certain conditions. Which means that if you know how to use the second and third domain like a like a scholar, like a president. Yeah, like if you're really like an entrepreneur. Yeah, there's ways to use the second and especially the third. The third domain, for the very few educated in the highest degree of sophistication, the third domain could be so much more powerful than the second and first combined, and ultimately rule everything. But the third domain is largely weaker than the first by far, and even weaker than the second, but can be at least maybe about as strong as the second. But the first domain is kick-ass. The first domain is what soldiers use when they're murdering each other. So the first domain is an aggressive spiritual influence, which is forced on you. If I rushed you with a knife trying to stab you, well, I wouldn't be in the second domain because I'd hesitate. Because in the second domain, the domain itself, and it would question everything. So we'll talk about the second domain in a minute. The first domain is not in question, and in its spiritual entity, it is not questioning or won't question anything as its rule, which means the first domain's behavior is never think twice and always just go with the first thought you have. And the first domain is always the first thought you have, and they won't have a second thought. They'll stop it from entering. So the first domain is really good at ignoring all information that tries to come to it. In fact, it's kind of as a rule, the first domain says, I don't accept that you know anything, and I do accept that I know it all, even though I know I don't know it all, because I could feel it all. And ultimately, the domain needs confidence and will establish a superior, bold competence, fearlessness. And how it does it is it utterly locks out anything from coming in, any information. I don't listen to you, and I don't accept anything you're going to say at all. And I don't have to actually be against you, but I probably could be and will be. You don't tell me what to do, and I'll tell you what to do. That's the first domain. The mentality of the first domain is a leader, is an aggressive soldier, or just a psychopath killer. It'll come at you and take you out by force if it can't influence you to do what it wants to, not by force. The end result of the first domain is violence, or if not, is a dispossession of the first domain. So in a conflict in the first domain, anybody using it solo or in a singularity will have an end result. It's always the same. Either they become powerful masters of the universe and presidents of their worlds and friends and leaders and fathers and greatness. And so they're always going to seek to master their domain. And it is possible to master it. Meaning if you succeed in the first domain as a solo, that means you don't take the second or third. If you take the second or third domain, it dissipates and destroys the first. So the first is only effective by itself alone. And that means that you cannot be in company with the other entities or accept their information or their spirit or anything. You have to kind of be in denial. No, I don't accept anything. I'm in the first domain. I accept only this. And so it's powerful, it's strong, and it usually ends in some form of total awesome celebrating victory of I have achieved the spiritual enlightenment of greatness. I am a leader of men. I'm a hero of demigods, a god himself. Well, that's an ultimately exaggerated. I just ultimately exaggerated the idea and the feeling. Yeah, it's like a drug-induced high, euphoric possibility. And the sad part here is that it's about 5% or less successful, which means that 95% of the first domain will either represent people taking the first domain in singularity and struggling in a power struggle for their entire life. People in the first domain will be in a power struggle of some intense kind. It'll not be a small struggle. People who are in the first domain will be arguing with their wives, telling their kids they're wrong, correcting people all the time. That's how they keep it. That's how they have it. And that's how they end up mastering it, is to literally tear other things down to keep and build themselves up. And it's kind of required. And it's kind of required. Well, I'm going to say kind of required. I'm being nice. It's kind of required because ultimately you can do it without tearing others down, but it'd take longer. And understand, if you didn't have a full understanding, like an educated, like I understand, even I understand. Now I even have problems and struggling. I'm telling you, it's absolutely required that you're willing to take a mentality in the first domain if you want to be a master of the universe, a captain of your soul or fate. It's like you have to be willing to be bad or mean or wrong, and who cares? And I don't have empathy or sympathy for you. Well, that's pretty much how you'll end up mastering the first domain, at least if you ever do. And 95% of the time you won't. So people will have to give it up at some point. Most people who are trying to master the first domain will go through a power struggle for years, trying to achieve some kind of mastery of it, and they'll let it go at some point. They'll let it go and say, I used to struggle and be, man, I don't even know what my life used to suck, man. I used to fight for everything, and I was always at war and battle. Well, that was because you were trying to master the first domain, and you had some heroic mythological idea that you were going to be greatness, but you realized that it just don't work, that you're not a demigod, that you're not an actual god, that you're just a man. That's why you'll end up coming to the conclusion, like, I can't, this domain is just, it's only for gods. I'm sorry. Let God have it, because I don't think God's going to screw up with it. But yeah, I can't do it, or I'm not going to do it anymore. And then that's called maturity. So the end of the first domain is often called maturity. It's also called mastery. So, the few, the proud, the men who become the myths, in the legends, well, those are men that actually mastered the first domain, and they did it, which means it can be done. But like I said, how many mythological Achilles or Hectors or heroes are there? How many myths really have a hero? Not that many, because understand it's rare. Okay, so the first domain, lastly and foremost, is a penetrating, possessive force, which is, as its behavior and as its rule, always possessing, moving, and penetrating into everything. That's how it instills its influence. It's not a passive power, and it can be a passive power, but it doesn't consider itself it will not be in a passive power. It's not passive. See, because we're going to talk about second domain now and what it is. The second domain is a passive power. The first domain is not passive. It is aggressive and penetrating and possessive, and by force if necessary. If I can't force you physically by beating you up, well, that's as a result of you wouldn't do what I wanted. It ends in a fight. It always ends in violence. It always ends at some point where in the massive tragedy struggle. So the second domain will be considered a power, and the second domain is also a domain of power. Now, the second domain will be described as the same as the first domain, but then I'm going to tell you something about the first domain in a second. So that was different from what I've already talked about it. So remember I told you the first domain was like a firecracker exploding, and then the sound that you can hear, the sound of the firecracker when it explodes, and that's like that's the size of the first domain. Well, that's actually the second domain and the size of the second domain. But understand, I described the first domain as the sound you hear from the firecracker explosion as the first domain, because the actual firecracker is the first domain. So understand that the sound the firecracker makes when it explodes is actually the second domain, but it's actually the size of the first domain. So this can be confusing and it's very complicated and technical and complex, but it's also exciting to learn, because when you start to really learn this, you will be happy and proud and glad that you're actually learning something that you can use, that can be good. And ultimately, it's in the end, understand that I was here I want you to know that you can't look at me like, well, has he achieved a success in the first domain, and how could you think he could talk about it? I have not achieved a success in the first domain. In fact, I've largely used the first domain in my struggle and also hated it, and also got mad at other people for doing it. So I would hate the first domain, and I would not want to use it, and I felt like I was forced to use it. In the struggle, my struggle to achieve mastery, I was trying to master an idea, not willful intent. And ultimately, I was willing to push a willful intent into my idea of that I want to do it. And of course, I was learning along the way, and I couldn't always talk to God, like ask him a question, literally, like I can now. So right now I could ask God a question, and I want to tell you a little bit about that too, and how I do it, and how important it is to know how to do it. See, when I talk to God, I do talk to him in my head, like he could talk to me in my mind anytime. So I could be sitting here and he could be telling me something, and I could be hearing some voice in my head or imagining I'm like, hey, God, what's up? So, you talk to God and he just says, what's up? And you're not sure if it's real, but you're hoping it's real. Like, I'm talking to you, God, is it real? Yeah, it's real. Well, I don't know if it's really real. I hope it's real. It's real. Well, I'm thinking I'm having faith it's real, but what if, God, I'm just sitting here making up, talking to myself? What if you're not even here? Well, I am here. I know I'm having faith you are, but I think you are. But see, my whole life I was like that. I had a doubt. I doubted that maybe I even was talking to God, or maybe when I thought he was telling me something, I thought I was imagining it. It wasn't him. It was my imagination. And then I wondered if it was him. And no matter what, I couldn't find a satisfaction or any kind of a calm knowing that it's okay. God is here and he's talking to me, because I never had a feeling it's okay, even when he was here talking to me, especially because he could even tell me to calm down and relax. I'm right here. And I'd say, I know, but I might be just making it up. And my God, if I'm actually crazy, it's pretty bad, you know? So like literally it was disturbing. It was a disturbing experience for me to have an interaction with God that should have been calming and calming me down, because it didn't. So understand that I have the many ways that I react to life are not like normal people or common people will, because common people will have faith that it's okay, or they don't have to really know. They're not required to have to know. We don't have to know everything, right? No, what are you talking about? Who taught you that, man? You made me mad. Like, I can't believe you just said that. That hurt my feelings. We don't have to really know. That's why I'm upset. Is we don't really know, and we think we do. So understand, I'm ready to fly off the handle at any time. It's not because of anything I've done wrong. And that's what I want you to know. It's not that I've done anything wrong. I have done nothing wrong. And God has told me I've done everything right. And unfortunately, and sadly, he says, but also gladly, it's a good thing that in the tragedy that could have been a lot worse for you, that the end result for me was that I'm very disturbed when I've got what I want. In the end, I got a relationship with God and I got to talk to him, and he came to me and he showed me who he was, and I got a witness. And I'm going to tell you how I got a witness. You see, when God talks to me, and even when I started to realize that I knew it was him and I wasn't imagining it, a lot of things he could tell me, like the name of a word that I didn't know the meaning to. So God could use a word in a sentence. He's talking to me. He could tell me something, and he'll use a word. I don't know what the word means, and I'll tell him like, what does that word mean? He'll say, look it up in the dictionary, and then he'll use two more words that in a row. I'll say, wait, well, God, when you're talking to me, why don't you just use words that are simple so I'll know how to understand you, because you're using words I don't understand. And he's saying, I'm doing it on purpose. What? Yeah, I'm doing it on purpose. God started using words that I didn't understand. That's why he'd tell me to look them up. And then I'd say, I didn't want to look them up, just use words I do understand. He's saying, I want you to have faith that whoever's talking to you ain't you. Do you know the words I'm using? And I'm saying, no, I don't even know what they mean. Well, then how can you be talking to yourself if you don't even know the words you're saying when you're doing it? If you're imagining this conversation with yourself, you don't even know the words I'm using. I'm talking to you, and I'm saying, wow, that's true. Okay, I like it then. I started to like it. I was disturbed at first, and then I started to like it. I was like, wow, okay, you use words all the time that I don't understand, God, because that really gives me an ability to, while he's talking to me, have an experience of a feeling of a knowing that, my God, whatever's telling me this, and I think it's God, he's using words I don't understand. He's talking in a manner of speech way higher educated than me. I didn't go to college and learn all those big words. Well, understand that was the whole reason that he started using those big words. And that was the whole reason I started to feel better about the fact that it was hard to understand him. And even now it's hard to understand him, because he'll choose to use words I don't know. I have to still figure it out. But often enough, his reasoning for that, I understood it. It was to make me comfortable and to help me find some comfort in knowing that it can't be me if I don't even know what the words mean that I'm supposedly talking to myself with. If it is just me making this up, I can't possibly be making up words. I don't know any words I don't know the meanings to. How can I even do it? Yeah. So that gives me a little bit more comfort. But ultimately, I still didn't have a lot of comfort, because it was ultimately like, I would tell God, like, I've suffered too long. Do you know how long I've suffered? I've been traumatized, man. And he'd be like, I know, but you have to calm down. And I'm like, but I'm not calmed down. I'm not even close to calm down. I couldn't know what calmness was from the beginning of my life, when I came out screaming out of my mommy, until like I'm still screaming right now. And he's like, I know, and I'm right here, and you need to calm down. And I'm like, wow. And I'm realizing that he is indeed really here. And I'm saying, and I never have ever had this kind of comfort, knowing that you're really here. And not until I was over 50 years old did it ever even introduce itself one time, which meant that until I was 50 years old, I literally had no witness that God could even exist, because he never came to me in the first 50 years of my life. He never came to me, not one time, to prove to me that he is God or that he is here. Every time I ever imagined I was having any reaction, it was always the doubt of, I'm crazy, man. In fact, religions must be insane. They're just like talking to God and probably talking to themselves. And he's not even there. What if he's dead? What if he doesn't even exist? You see what I'm saying? Like I was saying, man, there's something way wrong with how we interact with God and how it's okay. It's not okay. So I was already at a big loss in this world coming into it. And existing in this world was a hard thing for me to do. And every kind of way while I exist in this world my whole life. As a grown up, and way much worse as a kid, but as a grown up, I suffered. And I also tried not to suffer. I tried to ignore my suffering and pain, and I tried to like not have it. I tried to dispossess myself of my feelings when they hurt. I didn't want to have nothing to do with feelings that felt bad. And so I got really good at casting out any kind of fears I had, not because I was brave, but because I was scared of them. So I'd get rid of them. And then the result was a kind of idea that maybe I appear to be brave or not afraid, but that didn't soothe me because I had no courage. I just had no fear either. And the idea is, if you can get rid of your fears, well, that's great. If you can get rid of your fears, that's a success, because to be burdened by your fears is very torturous. But understand, a lot of people cannot even get rid of their fears their whole life. They spend their whole lives afraid and in fear, harassed by their own fears, which they may call not their own, or they may say it's the devil harassing them, or demons, or whatever their fears are that they try to not have. Well, it's sad to say that most people are suffering in a lifelong struggle of being in terror and fear and trying to cope with it. Like, we're alive and we're going to die, man. This life is going to freaking die. What the hell can I be not afraid about? And ultimately, then you'll have to deal with ignoring the truth or just not thinking about it. And you'll have to get rid of your fears or not let them in, whether they're you or not. And ultimately, we'll all be taught to at best, deal with the fears we can't get rid of. And that's not to me, that's not even okay to allow that state to exist in a collective of people. A whole collective of people is a lot of people on the same frame of mind and spirit. So you could have a football team that's all one mind. That whole football team is one brain. They're all working together and they don't think. They act as one unit. Well, that's called a collective. And in our society, there's collectives. There's many collectives, and they're different sizes. But the collective of fear is in the human race everywhere, all the time. And the different humans are either not going to take the collective. They'll cast it out, dispossess themselves from it, tell it can't come in. And ultimately what they're doing is they're actually warding off a spiritual entity not to enter them, just like they would ward off the fear itself not to enter them. And so they do it like as if it was, that fear might as well be a demon trying to get in, because you won't let that fear in and you'll say, get the hell out of here, you demonous fear, or whatever. Yeah, because however you look at it, you've got to not let it in. Yeah, that's true. It might be a demon trying to get in you, possess you, but it might just be your fears that are trying to get in you, because they are you. Yeah. So does it really matter to have to understand what you won't take, the fears you won't be burdened by anymore if you don't have? Well, if you don't have your fears anymore, because how'd you get some success that you've struggled hard enough, let's say, to push your fears out, and you've practiced and struggled daily your whole childhood, struggling in fear and also struggling in pain and struggle and in conflict. You've practiced like keeping those demons out, and that fear that you might successfully keep away, or you might actually keep out of you. It gives you relief, and what happens is it's a small success. Now understand that fear that you can succeed in getting rid of. Well, you understand that you succeeded in keeping it out, and then it's not in you. And so understand that you'll still be afraid that it might get back in you. And you might spend your whole life being afraid you're going to get afraid any minute. So it's still kind of like a fear. See, you don't have courage. You can get rid of your fears successfully and still not have any courage. And the result will be that someone else will think you have courage because they won't see that you have fears. And they'll even think and say, you're courageous. It appears you're not fearing anything. And I'll say, well, yeah. And if I'm a regular person, I wouldn't know any of this, but I'd say it's a disappointment and a deeply regretful knowledge to know that I could successfully get those fears out, and also know that those fears might not be demons. They might be parts of me that I was supposed to take and deal with and assimilate. And I'm also saying, I think I'm missing something I'm missing something. I'm missing my fears, and I'm glad I got rid of them. But let me tell you something. I'm missing some important part of myself that I never have had. And the only successful thing that I've done is I've gotten rid of my fears somehow. And I've also noticed that I'm still missing something so important. And I may not even know that those fears may be actually what I am missing, that I did not deal with, assimilate, accept, and turn into some kind of grace. Instead, I've cast them out, called them my enemy, and I don't have them anymore. And it is a suffering, and there's no courage for a person that has not dealt with their fears. You have to deal with your fears, assimilate them somehow, dealing with them somehow, accepting them. But I'm not saying you have to accept them. That's the whole crazy thing, is somehow when you accept fears properly, they seem to go away, but they don't go away. When you accept fears and assimilate them properly, they are in you. You accept your fears. You face the music and accept your fears and understand. Then they're in you, but you're not afraid. And that's good, actually. No one can achieve that state. They only get rid of them and achieve getting rid of them. They still don't have courage now, and they spend the rest of their life without courage and disappointed that they have something missing important, and they don't relate it to it's the fears that they got rid of. That was the key element. If you get rid of your fear, you will fail utterly to find courage, peace, or calmness forever. And you'll always maybe find relief that you've got rid of them and they don't come back because you keep them out. But then you'll always spend every day saying, I'm missing something so important. I don't know what I'm missing, but man, it's killing me. And you won't assimilate it with the fears, see? And maybe, I'm not claiming that that's exactly it. What I'm saying is maybe I am claiming it. That's exactly it. But maybe I don't have a right to say to you that you don't want to get rid of your fears. You want to take them in and have them and then deal with them. And they won't be there. When they assimilate somehow, then you won't have them anymore. And when you have your fears dealt with properly, the courage is the result. Courageousness and brave men have not got rid of their fears or succeeded in being unafraid. They've taken their fears and faced their death. And when you face your death on the battlefield and you accept that you're going to die and you just know it, and it's going to have to be okay because you're not going to stop fighting, and you know the odds are not going to be in your favor, then you accept the truth and you say, I'm going to die and I won't last long, but I'll fight to the end, and I accept that my end is coming and near and tragic. And that's it. I fight in the battle and I quit being afraid, and I've just taken my fears in, not keep struggling with them. So understand, when you take your fears in and accept your death, or there's a big relief in it. And although you think like, how could a soldier just accept they're going to die now? And you're just going to, you giving up? No, much the opposite. I'm accepting my fate and utterly taking my fears in and dealing with them and saying, yes, I'm afraid to die, but let's not be busy being afraid, because I'm about to die and I need to fight hard and win. And so I need to be brave. And ultimately what you're going to find is your bravery comes in. It was always in. It comes out. Your bravery comes out, and your fears come in, and your bravery comes out. And that's when your bravery comes out. And then suddenly you're realizing on the field of battle, and you're a soldier, you're suddenly realizing, after you've done some emotional growing up and some emotional, profound emotional maturity, of accepting your death, and that, you're just going to accept the truth and deal with it. And still fight and struggle, only in that you have to do your job, and it's a hard job, and it probably will kill you, but you'll discover that while you fight and continue to fight, a little time passes where there's a part of you that says that this is the end, and it wants to become terrified, but you already have accepted your death, and you say there's no use in becoming terrified. This is where I become terrified, the moment I accept that I'm going to die. And what you expect is it would be the moment you become terrified, because that's a moment that a lot of people absolutely lose it and become terrified. That's when they freak out and run across the field like naked. That's when they go crazy and insane, and they never come back from it. So understand that when you experience on the battlefield that once you've accepted your death and your fears, the fears don't go away. They come, you accept them, take them in, the courage comes out, and then you say, wow, okay, I'm calm. I'm really calm. Everything is, I am so okay with myself right now. Well, you're not even worried about dying, are you? No. And you shouldn't either, because we're going to die. But let's not think about it, because we need to try to live. So let's just fight and accept that, whatever comes next is coming. And so what happens is the result is a strong courage that comes out of you. And understand, it's as surprising as I promise that any man has ever went through it. did not see it coming. They saw it not. They didn't see it coming. They didn't think the end result of literally taking the terror in and accepting their death. They didn't think it was going to end in courage. They thought it was going to end in them giving up and dying. But what they discover is that they truly find some kind of courage on the battlefield, and it's permanent. It is a permanent courage. It never leaves, and the fear never comes back after that, because they've already died on the battlefield. In fact, the moment they accept their death in a real way is a death in itself. They die in some way. The spirit in them of fear, it dies. It just goes away, or it goes in and goes to sleep. Whatever happens to it, it's a permanent change. So it becomes like the hero of the war, the guy who's really brave, and you wonder, like, how come that guy's so brave and he's like a god, or he's just like a hero? Well, he's not pretending it. He's achieved a grace, a calm knowing of his ultimate fate is death. So he's already accepted it. And so in a sense, he's free to live with courage, knowing that he's not going to be busy thinking or letting his fears rule him, because his fears are just going to be afraid of the end, and he's not afraid of the end anymore. Okay, so if you can achieve this result, well, then you won't be busy in the first domain and struggling. So men in the first domain who fight war are trying to refuse to accept the second and third domain. So if you accept the second domain, it's like accepting the idea of death. Let's go back to the firecracker. Remember when I was telling you about the firecracker? The firecracker, when you light the firecracker and it blows off, that's the first domain. And I described to you that the sound the firecracker makes, it goes pretty far, right? You could hear a firecracker half a mile away. So that's the area of effect of the first domain. But the truth is, I want you to see it like that because it's true. But the truth is, that's actually the second domain, because the firecracker itself is the first domain. It's the actual firecracker that goes bam. It doesn't have a sound. It has a physical explosive result, and it doesn't really make a sound. The sound is not to be actually, if you know, the sound is not in the first domain. The sound comes out of it. The sound is the second domain, and it literally comes as a result of the first domain exploding. It makes the second domain, it brings it into existence. So if the first domain is a physical explosion of an actual firecracker, then the actual sound the firecracker makes is not that strong. Understand that the strength of a firecracker exploding could blow your finger off. So if you try to figure out, if you want to know that a firecracker could be strong, because like if you're holding a firecracker and it blows off, it could blow your finger off or hurt you. So understand that's the strength of the first domain. It's pretty damn strong. Now the second domain is the sound the firecracker makes, and so the second domain is not that strong as compared to by far at all. So it's what I've just told you is an excellent description to understand the strength difference. The second domain is certainly powerful in that when you hear the firecracker explosion, you know what happened. What happened, man? Did you hear that? That was a firecracker just went off. Now, when you hear the sound of the firecracker, you don't think that you're hearing just the sound. When you say, whoa, did you hear that? You're actually saying, I know that was a firecracker, an actual firecracker that exploded that's only this big. It's not half a mile away where I can hear the sound. So what you are very aware that the sound that is made by the firecracker exploding is literally not the firecracker itself. It's the sound that comes from the firecracker after the explosion. So it's something a little bit separate and comes right after the explosion. The sound is not there until the explosion is completed. And therefore, when the first domain completes itself and ends, it's where the sound begins. And it's also, in some sense, a part of the first domain in the area of effect. So the first domain affects the second domain completely. So that the power of the first domain is into the entire second domain, and is, in a sense, not the second domain, in the sense that a firecracker is making a sound, and the sound of the firecracker is also part of the firecracker exploding, but the sound is not the firecracker itself or the firecracker power of the explosion. The damage that a firecracker does is not going to be done in the sound. If you try to say how dangerous is the sound of the firecracker, could it blow my fingers off? No. In fact, it's impossible. The sound of the firecracker could not blow your hand off or hurt you. It could hurt your ears if it's really close. So understand, if you're really close to the first domain in the second domain, it could hurt your ears. The sound could be damaging somewhat, but understand that when you know that the first domain, how strong it is, what you realize is it's so much stronger than the second domain. And you also might be disappointed when you understand that the second domain is more thought to be powerful, like the first, because when you hear a firecracker explode and you hear the sound, you'll also think that it was the firecracker. So it must have been the same thing, right? No, but what if I told you the sound of the firecracker can't hurt you? Not unless you're really close to it. But if you put your ear right up to the firecracker, yeah, then it could hurt your eardrum. Then, yeah, that's about how strong the second domain is. You have to be really close to it, the first domain and the second domain. Now, what if you're not that close? What if you're in the second domain and you're not that close to the first domain? When the fire blows off, the sound won't be, the sound is getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. So understand, when the first domain starts, the firecracker starts to explode. When the first domain ends, the firecracker finishes the explosion and has exploded. And now there's no more first domain. Now the sound of the firecracker, being the second domain, starts up, and then the sound shoots across the sky, and it's also part of the first domain. But it's not, because understand that the second domain is literally only a part of the first domain, just like a firecracker is not the sound it makes. And it's really not. A firecracker is literally only the literal explosion that it is. The sound it makes is just what happens afterwards, and it's a secondary thing. It's called the second domain. The second domain is feared and also thought to be strong, like the first. So people who don't understand any of this will actually think the second domain is just as bad ass, kick-ass strong as the first. So they'll fear it, they'll be afraid of it, and they'll certainly be afraid of the first domain. If you come around someone in the first domain, you're going to scare them or make them upset or make them nervous. It'll always happen that people can feel the first domain, and if you're using it, they're going to feel maybe threatened or fearful. Or maybe they just will say, I don't have nothing to be afraid of, and I'm not going to feel threatened. The reality is, if you have the first domain and you're in it, it's like you're the firecracker exploding itself. It's a powerful energy charge. It's a powerful entity. Okay, so then the second domain, being a part of the first domain, as the sound is, well, it is also feared and thought to be strong, but it's not truly. And so the second domain has a disposition that is in it when it's created. It's disappointed, first of all. The second domain is born into a disappointment. The second domain represents Eve coming from the rib of Adam. So let's say the first domain is Adam coming from the image of God. That's the firecracker itself. And let's say God's a stick of dynamite. Let's say God's a nuclear bomb. God's a powerful, God's domain is like a nuclear device, but then Adam's domain is like a firecracker. So making Adam in the image of God is kind of like taking a nuclear bomb that's God and making a firecracker for Adam. So Adam's comes out. Adam's a little disappointed because he'll say, like, damn, God, you're like a nuclear bomb. I'm only a firecracker. And he'll say, yeah, but that firecracker, if you keep it in your hand and light it off, it'll blow a finger off. Don't tell me you're not strong. You could blow someone's finger off. When they piss you off, you might blow them the finger off. And really? I could blow someone's finger off? You bet. You get mad at somebody and they're going to feel their finger getting blown off. Well, that's the power of the first domain. When the first domain is used strong and aggressive, you'll be scared. You'll be scared as you would be if you were worried about your finger getting blown off when you were holding the firecracker when you blew it out. You also might think it's fun to hold it, but the danger, and it does exist. Okay, so the second domain is born in disappointment. The first domain's disappointment is not much because it's always talking to God in the sense that it was created in the image. It's an explosive device. So God is a domain that created Adam as an explosive device, and it might be a little firecracker, but don't think it's not fun and also dangerous. Now the second domain is disappointed in coming into existence because the second domain is part of that first domain, as just like the sound is part of the firecracker, but the sound is not at all related or part of that firecracker. It comes after the explosion, and it cannot come at any time before the explosion is complete, which means the first domain has to stop before the second domain could start. That means the firecracker has to stop exploding and finish its explosion. It has to do it by the laws of physics, or the second domain can't even come in. For a firecracker cannot make a sound until the explosion occurs. And if you try to explode a firecracker and stop its explosion right in mid-explosion, well, first of all, it's impossible to do it, right? Well, I mean, if it fizzles out, I guess you could say, it didn't explode, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that literally the first and second domain are separated from the moment the explosion is complete and the sound roars across the sky. It's like a bolt of lightning is the firecracker, and the bolt of lightning goes, and it doesn't make a sound. But then the thunder comes, and that's the second domain, the cool. Well, understand, when you hear the thunder, how scary it is. Now, how dangerous is thunder when you hear it? How dangerous is it? If you hear the thunder after you see the flash of lightning, well, how scared are you that thunder is going to kill you when you hear it? Maybe it's too loud and you die. Well, certainly a dog or a cat or someone who doesn't know, a child, will think that the thunder is more dangerous than the flash of light. And if a child sees the bolt of lightning hit the ground, they don't understand what it really is. They're not privy to the truth, and they won't then fear the first domain as much as they'll fear the second domain. And mostly human beings of intelligence don't fear the second domain more than the first, because they know what lightning is. And if a lightning bolt strikes your ass, it don't need to make a sound to kill you. And then when it strikes your ass, you'll be dead before the sound even starts. So understand that you don't need to even think about the second domain. If the first domain ends you, the second domain never even came. It wasn't even there. The second domain can't end you. The second domain is not powerful enough to do any damage at all. And so the reality is the second domain is a reflection or mirror image of the first domain and has really no power. It merely announces the first domain. The firecracker explodes. I'm the explosive device. Kaboom! And then the sound rages out shouting, and I'm the explosion, and the sound of, I wish I was the firecracker. Yeah, but you're not. Yeah, but I'm thunder. I'm scary. Don't you hear me? Yeah, but you're not a bolt of lightning. Ha! You're not even a bolt of thunder. You're just a sound that announces the lightning's return or entrance. Yeah. Oh, no. You telling me I'm not strong? No, you sound pretty strong, but you're not strong. You can't hurt me. So people have an innate knowledge, even if they don't know, that the second domain is I don't have to worry about being killed by it. And certainly I might, because I'm a child or an animal, or just have no idea. And so I'm just scared because the fears are just taking me over. So yeah, and it will also try to claim that it's stronger than the first. The thunder will say, you think the lightning will kill you? Wait till you hear how loud I am after the flash. The second domain tries to convince you that it's actually way more mighty than the lightning strike. And understand that you'll believe it, because if you don't know the truth, you would actually say that's true. That I've always seen a flash of lightning. I don't even know what lightning is, but I do. It's a flash. It's a bright flash, right? No, it's an electrical charge that is an actual electrical charge of plasma that is also makes a bright flash. Yeah, but you've seen the bright flash. You don't know what the plasma charge does, huh? Lightning is not a bright flash. It's an actual charge of plasmic electrical energy surge, which is in a million volts. It's as powerful as the sun. Our very sun itself is not as strong or as hot as a lightning bolt. A lightning bolt's hotter than the sun. It comes from like Zeus's thunderbolt, man. It's deadly. But it's deadly to the point of no return, man. You get struck by it, you are dead, and it can't even be nice. So understand that the power of the first domain has no mercy. I want you to think of it like, I want to understand this, man. I want to know what's the first domain. It's the domain of men, the willful intent of aggressiveness. It's determination, determinism. I ain't gonna lose, man. I'm using the first domain. I am the bolt of plasma lightning. And understand, in a spiritual sense, people will fear you when you're mad. People will actually feel afraid when you come around, threatened perhaps, wondering what are you going to try to hurt them? Understand, when you have the first domain, it is felt in a spiritual sense, and people will try to ignore it. And as a community, when people are being a community, understand that people have learned how to ignore and not show on their faces or their body language at all anything they're acknowledging. So when people are feeling things in life, they're taught, don't have your body language don't let anyone see you afraid. If you're trying, what if the first domain's coming? Well, that's what you'll be sitting there doing. What if it's coming? Well, if someone sees you doing that, man, if you feel the first domain coming, don't look afraid. Make sure you go look in the mirror, look like you're brave. I understand people are used to like making sure that when they're starting to sense their fear and it comes into them, oh my God, the first domain's coming. Well, that's when they're sitting there going, I'm not afraid. So understand that you don't see people acknowledging their detecting what the first domain is, or when it comes around, or that it moves to and fro, or that it comes to you 20 times a day, or maybe it didn't come to you at all that day. Understand, people are always worried about death coming, like the first domain coming. And when death comes to you, the first domain comes to you. And if death comes to you and it's the second domain that comes to you, it's possible, but it's not likely, and it's not common. The not only is the second domain largely harmless, but there's actually there's an exception to that completely. If the second domain can somehow get the first domain as well, so the second domain actually has both itself and the first domain, well then understand that if a two can be two ones, it can have the first one and the second one, then it can do it. So understand, if a 2 is going to be only the second one, it doesn't have the first one, then that's a second domain that doesn't have the first domain. And it is a second domain. It's the second domain that's weak. And it'll also appear strong. That's what I've been talking about. So think of it like, if I'm a first one, I'm the first domain, and you're the second one, you're the second domain. Well, I'm going to say, if you don't include me in on everything with you, then you're not going to include the first domain with you. And that means you'll say, but I'm strong, right? My thunder sounds louder than your lightning could ever strike. Well, yeah, you'll feel like, I don't need the first domain. It may be strong, but I feel stronger than it, even though I'm weaker than it by far. So the second domain is largely not fooling itself. But if you have the second domain, you've not been taught this, people in the second domain will feel like they have the power of the first domain when they don't. So when the thunder roars, they'll think they've got Zeus's lightning bolt gun. They'll say, oh my God, did you hear my gun went off again? I just cast another lightning bolt. And I'll say, no, you didn't. You don't have a lightning bolt gun. I'm the lightning bolt gun. You don't include me. You don't even think you need me. Your thunder rings so loud after I show up that you think it's you. So the actual second domain takes all the credit for the first domain, for even though they're not going to be it. So think of a second one saying, I don't need the first one. I'm a second one. I'm just as good. I'm just powerful or more powerful because I'm even more than the first one. I'm a second one, even more than it. Okay, that's a good way to rationalize how you can feel happy about you don't need the first domain, and then understand what you've done. What you've done is felt really good about the fact that you're going to be potentially, well, if you ever get into a fight or a conflict actually, or go to war, if you're in the second domain, it's like a person that goes to battle and they're really strong, going, I'm going to kick ass. We're going to war, man. You ready for the war? We're going to kick ass, man. You got to be brave. That's the second domainer. And understand, it might be a first domainer. So we've got all these soldiers going to battle, right? And they're about to go to battle. Some of them soldiers are in the first domain. Some are in the second domain. We don't know who's in what domains, but they're all somewhere, placed somewhere and exactly in some position. So I want you to know, a group of soldiers, most of them are hopefully in the first domain. The truth is, maybe less than half of them are actually in the first domain. Then the next half of them are just acting like they're in the first, and they're actually in the second. So they don't know the difference, but they actually think they're even stronger than the first domain. So the biggest cowards in a group of soldiers, the biggest cowards will be men in a second domain that actually don't even know any of this, and they're actually thinking that they're in the first, but they don't even know what the first or the difference between them and it is. What they're doing is they have a high confidence that says, man, I know a hero when I see one, and that guy's a hero over there, and he's been in battle many times. And you know what? I've never been to battle, but I'll tell you right now, I know him, and I know that I could be just as brave as him or more brave than him. And I'd say, but you could be a big fool when we go to battle. You better be careful at first. Because yeah, you might just charge into battle and find out that you ain't got no guts. And you might find that you are so terrified that you're running for your life. And you might get shot in the back by your own people for being a deserter, or just disgrace yourself for peeing and shitting your pants. Well, I'm not going to shit my pants or pee. I am so confident that I could do it better. They're at least as good as that hero that's already done it. I know him well. I know you know him real well. I know that he's like my friend. He's been in battle. He's got medals. He's like, I've known him for 20 years, man. I know him deeply and intimately. I could be as brave as him. But you've never been to battle? No, I've never been to battle, but I would never cower. Well, let me tell you something. It might be true that since you're insisting that you're the firecracker, but you're not the firecracker, I promise. You're only the sound. And you think you can blow a finger off, do you? Let me tell you something. That hero over there that's got that medal on, he's blown fingers off. And he could blow your finger off, and that's why you like him and think and respect him. But let me tell you something. If you've never been in battle, you've never blown anybody's fingers off. You've never even tried it to know if you can do it. Oh, but I know I can do it. No, you know he can do it. And you're saying you're him because he's the firecracker, and you're the sound that's created after he goes off. Oh yeah, that's why I'm so into him. Yeah, that's why you love him and think like you know him so well, because you know where you came from was him. Yeah, I came from him. His courage is my courage. Well, it could be that way. Just be careful when you're in battle. You don't get caught running and peeing your pants, because it'll happen. It could happen. Well, okay, thanks for the warning. Certainly when the soldiers are in battle, soldiers will be ultimately a whole, but will be as a unified collective, strong and powerful in the spirit, and they'll be all meaning it. There won't be any cowards there. There won't be anybody there that's actually saying, well, there might be one or two that are actually realistic about the fact they don't have the first domain, and they actually know the second domain is kind of weak, and it could even be claiming it's a firecracker, but they're going to say my sound can't hurt anybody. I'm going to go out in battle thinking I could blow someone's finger off, and it's a trigger finger. I'm going to blow their trigger finger off is what I'll do. But I'm thinking, man, what if I'm just the sound, and the sound couldn't possibly hurt their trigger finger? Not even if I put a firecracker right next to your finger. If I put it right next to your finger, it certainly wouldn't hurt you. It might scare you, but it wouldn't even scare you if you said, what, you're going to put a firecracker right next to my finger and blow it off? I'm not afraid of that. Just don't touch my finger with it when you light it. Okay, great. So you're not afraid of it? Well, no, I'm aware that your second domain is harmless, even though it's growling like a lion. So then what happens when the second domain goes to war? If the second domain goes to war and it's the second one, it doesn't have the first, it's known as the second one, and it's like the first one, but it's also by itself, and it's also now a singularity in the second position. So what I want you to know is that a singularity is in the first position, and it's called a singularity because it's by itself. And when a singularity in the first position, or the first one, was created, Adam was created in the image of God, there was no Eve. There was no woman existing on earth when the domain of the willful intent of a spiritual influence in man, the man, Adam, his power in the spirit is real. It's the first domain. And when he was brought into this world, because God created him, there was no Eve existing, and there was no wife, and there was no woman. He couldn't have had a sister, not until she came out of his rib. So understand that when Adam was created, God let him grow up, and Adam grew up, and Eve wasn't there for a while. Let me tell you, because let me tell you that the domain had to be established without the second being there, because it was first. And so the second was created from Adam. The rib that Eve was created by, it suggests that the second domain came from the first domain, not from where the first domain came from, just like where Adam came from the image of God and God himself, and Eve didn't come from God or his image. And this is where women will be angry. See, this truth is this truth is just a disappointment in the second domain entirely, because the second domain is the domain of Eve, or the woman. And the first domain is the domain of Adam, or the man. And the man-Adam firecracker explosive device is powerful in the spirit, in a willful intent. Adam could walk around pissed off, and people are going to get scared, actually, not because because he's going to say, you feel me? Huh? And they're going to go, whoa, man, I do. You're powerful. I don't like it. Or you scare me. Well, it's because when you get scared of someone, you're not just being a coward necessarily. They're freaking powerful, and they're kicking your ass already. And when their spirit is beating you up, you're going to feel fearful. And when you feel fearful of someone and you're afraid of them, they're already beating your ass, swinging on you in the spirit, and you're getting your butt kicked, and you're already in a struggle. When you're afraid and someone's going to hurt you and they're about to do it, they're already in full combat. It's called spiritual warfare, and you're the victim, and you're losing. And the fear is present because you're at a loss. So you'll have fear present when you're at a loss. If you're fearful or afraid, you're already at a loss. You've lost something. What have you lost? You've lost the first domain. So why would you be afraid? Why does fear come into you? Why would I ever be scared of anything? Because you've lost the first domain. Now let's be aware the first domain is the domain that comes from a man only, from Adam only, and it's in the image of God, which is like a much more powerful than Adam explosive device, kind of like the nuclear bomb is God and the firecracker is Adam. And Eve comes from the firecracker as the sound comes from it after it explodes. She is going to come out from, wait a minute. So we're created in the image of God, right, Adam? Well, okay, fine, but I don't want to tell you that, Eve, but that's what we tell you. Well, what, are you disturbed, Adam? We're both created from the image of God, right? No, Eve, I don't want to lie to you. You don't want to lie to me? Well, tell me the truth. Eve, you came from my rib. You came from me. You didn't come from God. I came from God. I'm the only one that came from God. I'm strong like God is, but I'm not strong like God. But he gave me some strength. It's his strength I use. I have a powerful spirit. It's like God's spirit. I use it. It's not really mine, but yeah, it is me. It's my first domain of power, and I'm a man. It's my willful intent. It's my aggressive masculine anger that I own in my spirit, that is an influence and a power to be reckoned with, and a fear. When I get angry, Eve, do you not fear me? Yeah, I do. A little once in a while, I get scared when you get mad, Adam. Why are you doing it? Don't get mad at me, Adam. You're making me scared. Well, I know, Eve, I try not to get mad at you. I'm not mad at you, am I? No, you're not mad at me. But right, Eve, I have to be careful, don't I? I don't want to scare you, right? Yeah, I don't want to be scared, Adam. Well, understand, Eve, you could be strong. Why don't you be strong like me? Well, I'm trying. I want to be strong like you. Did we get created in God's image, both of us, Adam? No. I'm stronger than you by far, and I'm so strong you can call me an explosive device. But Eve, you're not an explosive device, and you're not even able to hurt anybody, Eve. You're in the second domain. You came from my rib. You have the power of man. I have the power of God. What? Eve, I have the power of God. I came from God. I'm sorry to tell you, you didn't come from God and his power. You came from me. Okay, I'll lean on you. Okay, but I'm disappointed. I know, because you're not able to. Eve, when you get mad, people laugh. People are going to go, she's mad. Explosive, huh? Because understand, Eve's reaction to you is when you get mad, people are going to laugh. They're going to let you chuckle at that idea. Eve's pissed off again at me. What are you doing, Eve? I don't know, man. When I get mad, just like you, Adam, I get mad, man. Adam, you get mad, you scare the hell out of me. But yeah, I get mad too, because people aren't fair. They have to fear me too. Well, Eve, they keep kicking their ass. It will be. But Eve, you can use my spirit, and you can't really fight with it unless you want to fight me. You don't really take my spirit to fight things. You take my spirit to be strong, and you don't fight anything, especially not me. My strength, and I fight and kill with it. I hunt with it. I kill animals with it. I kill people, Eve. I go to war. We have fights. I protect the house. If a wolf comes here, I have to kill the wolf. You won't go outside and do it. It's me. Okay, but then it's not fair. No, it's not really fair, is it? You can get mad at God if you want. All right. Now we can talk about that for a while, but let's talk about the domains. The domain in the second domain is disappointing. It's a domain that comes from a woman is getting the strength of God, and she'll try to take it like Adam takes it. So what she'll do is she'll under the firecracker. Well, I'm gonna blow off and make a sound anytime I want. And then will Adam look like a firecracker and explode? You can't make a sound because you want to be able to, Eve, you want to even be able to roar like a lion until I bite first. Are you kidding me, man? You mean I can't even roar until you bite? Eve, you roar because I bite. And if I don't bite into the enemy, you can't even make a roar sound. And if you do it, I've already bitten into something. And that's why you were able to do it. Eve, your power comes from directly, one of my powers, directly in effect. Eve, you draw your strength from my powerful explosions. You can't go to God and try to get power and try to just ignore me or say that you don't want. You're going to go to God. She did it. She went to God and said, I don't like Adam. I have to. He's like, I need him for everything. I'm too needy. I want to be strong. Like, hey, God, can you make me strong like Adam? Well, God didn't say anything to her. She told Adam. He went and talked to Adam and said, like, you can have to explain to Eve the first domain, the second domain. She's going to need to know this stuff. And so we're door of a lion, and you can really roar loud, even scare people. But a lot of men in the first domain, and especially ones that know, when you roar, they laugh and they kind of mock you, and you feel that, Eve, and you get your feelings hurt. Eve, if you go around roaring at people when I'm not exploding, it's an empty vessel roar. Eve, you sound silly, and in fact, the men mock you and your back, and then you get your feelings hurt, and you come home and you cry to me, and I feel sorry for you, Eve, that you're so hurt emotionally. But just you have to know, Eve, you can't go around being mad at people thinking that your roar is going to have any effect, except it has nothing, Eve. Yeah, and when Eve comes and yells at them and says, "No, you made me mad," they're going to say, "Eve, why are you yelling at us?" Adam could come yell at us, and we're going to be scared of him. Eve, you can be Eve, but I don't feel nothing. I'm not afraid of you. Okay, but then why am I being so angry and even more mad that I'm losing it? Eve, you're losing it because you have no power. When you yell at me, you can feel the way like your power is null and void. And you raising matter I get at you, and the more frustrated I get at you because I have no power, and I'm trying to tell you, feel my power, hear my roar. And we say, that's silly, Eve. We do hear your roar. Maybe I don't even want to know. I'm already upset, and there's nothing that's going to make me okay, because I can't even be powerful. Okay, but then Eve, you have to accept